Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving into a dramatic and fast-moving geopolitical moment that is reshaping Iran's relationship with Europe, triggering panic inside Tehran's ruling circles, and signaling a deeper isolation for the leadership surrounding Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. The phrase being repeated across diplomatic corridors is simple but powerful: Iran's bridges to Europe are collapsing, and the consequences are enormous. For years, Iran relied on Europe as a pressure valve. When relations with the United States were frozen, Europe was the alternative route for diplomacy, trade, finance, and political legitimacy. Those bridges were not just symbolic, they were real channels that allowed Iran to sell oil indirectly, access banking systems, negotiate nuclear terms, and soften international pressure. Now, one by one, those bridges appear to be shutting down. Inside Tehran, this shift has triggered visible anxiety. Iranian officials are issuing urgent statements, state media is changing its tone, and internal debates are intensifying. The reason is clear. Europe was never just another partner, it was Iran's last major connection to the Western system that still offered dialogue instead of outright confrontation. The European Union's recent moves signal a turning point. Diplomatic engagement is being replaced by restrictions, investigations, sanctions, and political distancing. European governments are increasingly aligning their Iran policy with security concerns rather than diplomatic optimism. For the Iranian leadership, this represents a nightmare scenario. To understand why this moment is so critical, we need to look at what Europe represented for Iran over the past decade. After the nuclear deal, European companies rushed into Iran. Energy giants, car manufacturers, airlines, and infrastructure firms all explored opportunities. Even after the US withdrew from the deal, Europe tried to keep the agreement alive. Special financial mechanisms were created to bypass American sanctions. This gave Tehran hope, but that hope has been steadily fading. European patience has been eroded by multiple factors: allegations of human rights abuses, crackdowns on protests, accusations of espionage and assassination plots on European soil, and Iran's regional activities have all added to the tension. Each incident weakened trust and hardened attitudes in European capitals. Now, we are witnessing the result of that accumulated frustration. European governments are no longer treating Iran as a difficult partner, but as a growing security problem. This shift in perception changes everything. Once a country is viewed through a security lens, compromise becomes far less likely. In Tehran, this change is being felt at the highest levels. The ruling establishment understands that losing Europe means deeper isolation and fewer options. China and Russia remain partners, but they do not offer the same economic lifelines or political legitimacy that Europe once provided. Europe connected Iran to global markets in a way no other partner could. The shutdown of these bridges also affects Iran's internal power balance. Hardliners argue that engagement with the West has failed and that resistance is the only path forward. Pragmatists, who long believed in diplomacy with Europe, are losing ground. This internal struggle is intensifying as economic pressure mounts. Iran's economy is already under severe strain. Inflation, currency devaluation, unemployment, and public dissatisfaction are widespread. Europe's disengagement removes another potential source of relief. Investment dries up, trade shrinks, financial isolation deepens. For ordinary Iranians, this means higher prices, fewer jobs, and growing uncertainty. European leaders, on the other hand, argue that they have reached a limit. They claim that continued engagement without accountability only empowers hardliners in Tehran. By shutting down diplomatic and economic bridges, Europe believes it is sending a message that actions have consequences. Whether this strategy will change Iranian behavior remains an open question. What is clear is that the psychological impact inside Iran is significant. State-aligned media is trying to downplay Europe's importance, emphasizing partnerships with Asia instead, but behind closed doors, officials know the truth. Europe mattered, Europe still matters, and losing it hurts. This moment also reshapes regional dynamics. Iran's reduced access to Europe limits its diplomatic maneuvering space. Regional rivals interpret Europe's stance as a sign of Iran's weakening position, allies become more cautious, opponents become more confident. The balance of power subtly shifts. For Supreme Leader Khamenei, this is particularly troubling. His long-standing strategy has been to resist the United States while keeping Europe engaged as a counterweight. With that counterweight slipping away, Iran faces a more polarized international environment. It becomes easier for adversaries to build coalitions against Tehran. The European Union's actions are not happening in isolation. They reflect broader global trends. There is growing coordination among Western countries on Iran policy. Information sharing, legal actions, and diplomatic messaging are becoming more synchronized. This coordination amplifies the impact of each individual move. Inside the Iranian system, this raises uncomfortable questions. Did the leadership miscalculate Europe's tolerance? Did hardline policies push Brussels too far? Could a different approach have preserved those bridges? These debates are happening quietly but intensely. At the same time, Europe's own calculations are complex. European governments face domestic pressure from voters concerned about security, migration, and human rights. Taking a tougher stance on Iran plays well politically in many countries. It also aligns with intelligence assessments warning about foreign interference and covert activities. The result is a closing circle. As Europe tightens its stance, Iran reacts with defiance. That defiance then reinforces European concerns, leading to further restrictions. This cycle is difficult to break once it gains momentum. The loss of European bridges also affects nuclear diplomacy. Europe was a key mediator in nuclear talks. Without trust and engagement, reviving agreements becomes far more difficult. The risk of escalation increases as diplomatic channels narrow. For the Iranian public, this geopolitical drama feels distant yet deeply personal. Sanctions and isolation translate into everyday hardship. Many Iranians feel trapped between a leadership that prioritizes ideological confrontation and an international community that responds with pressure rather than engagement. Protests and social unrest inside Iran add another layer of complexity. European governments cite these events as reasons to distance themselves from Tehran. Iranian authorities, in turn, accuse Europe of interference. This mutual suspicion further erodes the possibility of dialogue. The narrative inside Iran is shifting. Where Europe was once portrayed as a potential partner unfairly constrained by U.S. pressure, it is now increasingly depicted as hostile and untrustworthy. This narrative shift prepares the public for prolonged isolation, but it also narrows future options. From a strategic perspective, losing Europe limits Iran's flexibility. Diplomacy works best when multiple channels exist. When those channels close, the risk of miscalculation rises, messages become distorted. Red lines become unclear, crises become harder to manage. For Europe, shutting down bridges is also risky. Engagement allowed for communication and influence. Disengagement reduces visibility and leverage. European policymakers know this, but many believe the risks of continued engagement now outweigh the benefits. This moment may mark the end of an era, the post-nuclear deal period, where Europe tried to balance engagement with pressure, appears to be over. A new phase is beginning, defined by caution, restriction, and strategic distance. The big question is what comes next. Will Iran attempt to rebuild bridges through concessions and diplomacy, or will it double down on resistance and pivot entirely toward non-Western partners? Will Europe leave the door slightly open, or will it lock it shut? So far, signals suggest a hardening on both sides. Statements from Tehran emphasize self-reliance and defiance. Statements from Europe emphasize accountability and security. Neither side appears ready to compromise. For Khamenei and the ruling elite, the loss of Europe is not just a diplomatic setback, it is a strategic shock. It exposes the limits of Iran's current approach and forces difficult choices: adaptation or isolation, flexibility or rigidity. History shows that prolonged isolation rarely ends well for any country. It breeds economic stagnation, political radicalization, and social tension. Whether Iran can navigate this moment without further escalation remains uncertain. As we watch these developments unfold, one thing is clear. The bridges between Iran and Europe were not destroyed overnight. They eroded slowly, weakened by mistrust, strained by conflict, and finally closed by political decisions on both sides. The panic reportedly spreading among hardliners is less about Europe itself and more about what Europe represented: connection. Options, legitimacy, losing that changes the game. This story is far from over. Diplomatic landscapes can shift quickly, especially under pressure. But for now, the message is unmistakable. Iran's path toward Europe is narrowing, and the consequences will be felt not just in palaces and parliaments, but in the lives of millions. We will continue to track how this isolation impacts regional stability, nuclear negotiations, and Iran's internal dynamics, because when bridges fall in geopolitics, the shockwaves travel far beyond the river they once crossed. Stay with us as we break down what this means, why it matters, and how it could reshape the future of the Middle East and beyond.